Hey, Dustin, let's talk about three things: discipline, motivation, and habits. And I think these are all critical elements of sales. And I did a recent poll on LinkedIn, and I kind of assumed what the results were, and habits was a distant number three between the three. And but let's define them first, and you can give me feedback on what you think the definition, what you feel the definition is. Motivation's probably the easiest to define, where it's something we feel we want to do. Self-discipline or discipline is doing the stuff we know we should do and we do it. Habits are things that we do automatically. We really don't think about them. Brushing our teeth, driving, they're kind of subconscious because we've done them enough.
hmm
How have these played in your career?
Yeah. Hey, good morning, Brian. It's a great question. It really does make you think, especially I think with discipline and motivation and habits, just some of them kind of cross over. But I saw a quote. It was, I think, Jim Rohn, and it said, "Motivation is what gets you started. Habits is what keeps you going." So it just made me think about it more. But I do think it all kind of starts with motivation. You have to have that before you can get to the other ones, and then I think discipline comes next because you have to have that kind of self discipline to do the hard things every day, and then that forms into habits, especially when you're talking about like sales and business. So I kind of start at motivation first, and then I move to discipline, and then I move to habits. And they all kind of interconnect for sure, but I could see how that's an interesting poll question, and I like those results. It's cool.
Yeah, because the problem with motivation is that it's not consistent.
hmm
You're going to have a bad day. You're going to hear bad news. If you've just got a new comp plan, and they're typically not better, right? It's typically worse. Where's
Yep.
the motivation, right? Motivation went from a 9 to a 3. So then you're relying on either discipline or your habits. And how disciplined do you feel when you're not motivated? It can come and go too, right? Some days it's like, yeah, I got it. Yeah, or you half-ass it, or you wing it, or you do as little as possible. And I think about 10 years ago, I really got into, why don't I just focus on habits? And I had this
hmm
concept called automatically awesome. And it's like, I want
hmm
to, because why can't I make the things that I know I need to do, that usually relied on discipline or motivation, but do it so consistently that it's a habit? And I started keeping track of it every day, and really, reading books about it, making sure I did it something every day on it. And they say a simple habit's 21 days, so 3 weeks,
hmm
and more complex things, 66 days, or essentially 2 months. And I kept telling myself, if I can do it for 2 months straight, all of a sudden it's a habit. And the beauty of habits is that it's automatic. And the logic is it's harder not to do it than it is to do it.
hmm
And even when you look at the people on YouTube who brag about discipline, they take pictures of their watch at 4 a.m. in the morning, or they're out running 100 miles or whatever it is. They all say it's discipline, but isn't it really a habit?
It's a great point, and I think I know the people you're referencing because I definitely follow them on Instagram too. But yeah, I mean the habits. I was just thinking while you're talking, I have a habit tracker on my desk right here because I mean if I don't, it goes back to a lot of stuff in sales too. If I'm not writing it down and keeping track of it, like how do you know if you're doing it 21 days in a row or 60 days, whatever it may be? So I think you have to have a system behind it with habits and have some way to track it, and then it definitely ties into the discipline as well. And I think you also have to remove a lot of those, like you have to know your strengths and weaknesses, right? So if you know you're gonna want to go get junk food in the refrigerator or drink wine late at night and you don't really want to do that, you have to like remove those things away so that you can kind of keep that discipline and keep those habits consistent. So I mean, they definitely kind of cross over, but I think with habits, you have to have a system, you have to have some type of tracker for sales stuff or whatever. And then on the discipline side, you have to remove yourself from those situations where you're going to get influenced to do the bad stuff, right? So if it's prospecting, right? Let's think about prospecting. I mean, you get distracted with social media. So, turn off all your social media. Don't look, unless if you're using, well, you're probably using LinkedIn to prospect, but don't get on Instagram or Facebook or whatever. So just stuff like that I think about too. You have to like make it easier for yourself, I guess.
And you brought up a great point, because those things are bad habits, those distractions, the wine at night, the playing with the phone, overdoing it on social media. That's procrastination, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's a habit. And why is it so easy to create a bad habit? Because the system is ingrained in us. There's an immediate reward. You're distracted. It feels good. You get a little dopamine hit. Oh, somebody liked my post. Oh, somebody, or you get irritated by somebody else's post, and now you got to fight back or something. So there's, an immediate cue. This is better than prospecting. So you do it. An immediate reward, and the rewards keep coming, compared to prospecting, where the reward is so far down the road that it's not there. You need either a habit, discipline, or motivation to get started.
Yeah, it's a great point. I've read several books about habits, as I'm sure you have too, but you have constructive, destructive, neutral, and they're really all kind of like for better or for worse, right? So, because if you're not prospecting this week, you're not going to see, it's not really going to affect you this week, right? So you don't see it right away. So that's part of the problem. But if you start not prospecting for 4 or 6 weeks straight, you're going to see that later this year, next year, when you don't have any sales and you don't have anything in your pipeline. So that's the problem, is you don't see it while you're doing it, whether it's a positive or a negative one. Like if you're working out for a few days in a row, you're not going to see some crazy benefit right away, but months down the road, you will. And it's the same thing with like sales and prospecting. Like, and I think that's why people struggle with it so much. They're not getting that instant gratification like you're talking about. And it's hard for people to look long-term and be more strategic with it. But it's like those daily things that make you better. It's like chopping a tree down. Someone stops at the 99th chop and they walk away. If they would have done that 100th, they would have fell over, right? So it's, it's hard for people to grasp that, but it's definitely very relatable in sales too, because a lot of the complex ones are taking 6-12 months to close. So you have to do all those kind of good habits to get there and have that discipline too.
And what I found with myself and a lot of people I observe, that it's a lot of people are like thermostats, meaning that they always try and get back to some temperature. They, like New Year's Eve or New Year's Day, they get the urge to go to the gym. So they have the New Year's resolution, drop 10 pounds, hit the gym 3 days a week, whatever it is. Have no problem the first week. But then second week, third week, and even if they make progress and they stick with it for 6 months and they lose the 10 pounds, why does everybody gain them back? Why does everybody quit the gym and start the gym again next January? It's kind of a cycle. Yeah. And what ends up happening is they didn't build the habit, or they built the habit and they kept making it harder and harder, to the point where all of a sudden it got too hot and the air conditioner kicked on. So we got to take it back a little. And then they wait until it gets too cold and then they turn the heat back on.
No,
does that sound like a quarter?
It's a great point. I mean, I'm just thinking about with me working out, like I have a gym at my condo. I have a yoga studio downstairs. I have this like cross or like kind of Orange Theory type place. Like I can all walk to these places, but I do that on purpose because I can like, there's no excuses for me to make because it's not taking me an hour to commute or something. I can just walk down there and boom and do it. So I guess that goes back to like the New Year's resolution stuff. Like they just get tired of going to the gym or driving. I mean, you just got to make it as easy as possible with that stuff, at least from my perspective. And also surround yourself with like-minded people. That probably goes back to motivation some, but surround yourself with people that are doing the things that you want to do versus people that maybe aren't serving you as well with that type of stuff. I mean, if you're really serious about it and it's something that you are trying to get to, like you got to surround yourself with people that are doing that and kind of emulate them and mirror them. And I think that that can help too, as far as motivation and getting those habits too.
Yeah, and going back to like the 4 a.m. or the runners that you see on Instagram and YouTube, don't you think it would be harder for them to sleep until 5 a.m. than it would be to get up at 4 a.m.?
Yeah, for sure.
So is that still discipline?
Hmm.
That's a habit. It's not that it's
Yeah.
bad. It's just mislabeled, or I think discipline makes us feel stronger, right? So there's an ego boost to it, where a habit seems like, oh, it's passive.
Yep.
But which one is going to get you there in the long run? Because that consistency that you need is really habit.
No, yeah, it's a great point. I mean, you're totally right because that's what's going to build up over time is those small daily wins, like getting up at 4 a.m., whatever it may be. That's going to get you where you need to go. So yeah, I see where you're going with that as far as it really being more weighted towards the habit versus discipline. And discipline's more of like a ego boost of like just rah saying you can do that, or like, oh, I did all these different things. Although I do like David Goggins, I do listen to him quite a bit on Instagram. He's awesome. But yeah, it's a good point. I agree.
Well, I'll tell you a story about him and how disciplined he is. When he first came out with his book, I talked to him and I wanted him to be on the show. And he
Hmm.
goes, well, it sounds like there's more in it for you than me. And I'm like, well, you have books to sell and it can cost you a half hour. We're already 15 minutes into it. We could have had this done, halfway done by now. And he goes, well, let me talk to my PR people. And it's like, where's the discipline? You really don't have a half hour? You know, this is the irony that you have with he's a guy who's built up these great habits and this identity.
Hmm.
And I think that's really clearly the guy's disciplined. It does things that I could never do. But I think people follow him for the wrong reason. I think they follow him because he inspires them not to do anything, but just they live vicariously through him.
Hmm.
Is say he sold 1 million copies. I don't know what he sold of the book. How many people do anything?
Yeah, and that's a
1%.
big that's a big issue with books too. Is like it's good to read books, right? But if you're not actually like following up with anything, it's kind of what's the point? I guess it's better. That's a better habit than like watching TV for a couple hours.
Sure it
But it's
is.
like if you don't actually like do anything with it. But yeah, that's an interesting story with David Goggins. I've definitely read his books. I think he's got a new one that just came out. But that's a good point, I guess. And then you can be disciplined and have good habits in some areas, and then other areas not so much. So it's like you could be a machine working out, sales, and then you struggle in other areas of life, like family or whatever it may be. So that's another dichotomy, is like how well rounded are you too? Like I look at like all these different areas of my life, and like I'm really good with like business, sales, like that type of stuff, but then I'm not as good in some other areas that I try to work on. But I'm not as good with my habits there as I am in the other places. So I have to like retrain my brain and be more focused there, because the other stuff is like automatic, right? Because like you're saying, I've done it for so long, it's like you want to keep track of it too, but I don't need to put as much focus on that because it's already like a machine just like going. I need to work more on like the other stuff that I was mentioning. So
Right. Because this is kind of the downside of habits is that you tend, because it's best done daily,
hmm.
because that's when you get the momentum, you get the cues, your morning routine, you get the checklists, you feel good when you check it off. It becomes part of you, who you are. But then the weekend comes and you get this either 2 day interrupt where you have to have weekend habits, meeting your friends, talking to your family, whatever it is. But that's an interrupt. That's different. And it's hard to kind of keep those periodical interrupts because I,
Yep.
I bet a lot of habits are broken on like a 2 week vacation. It's great to have a break, but you didn't go to the gym for 2 weeks.
Yeah, I agree for sure. I think so for me personally, I try to do like 6 out of 7 days a week for most of my habits. So I give myself a little bit of break. And I used to do healthcare stuff all the time, and it was, you'd always talk about compliance. So it's like 85% compliant, right? So that's good. So that's how I think about it. So 6 out of 7 days. If I have a bad day or a couple bad days, you just can't let that turn into a bad week, a bad month, right? Because like, when I talk to certain customers with what I do now, it's like, it's okay. Like everyone's human, right? You're gonna have a couple bad days, but if you let those bad days turn into a bad week, bad month, same thing in sales. It's like, that's when you're gonna completely break that habit and go backwards. So everyone's gonna have slip ups, right? You just can't let it happen multiple days in a row. Or if you know you're going on vacation and you're gonna break away, just like be very aware of that for that 7 or 10 days so that you come back like refreshed or something. Maybe you do need to break away just to like regroup and get ready for next year, which is fine as long as you're kind of thinking about that, I guess. So,
And I think in sales, it's hard to build up good habits because, the number one reason people tell me they got into sales, after money is the variety.
mhm.
And variety is almost the opposite of habits. You like the roller coaster. You like doing something new every day, meeting new people, going new places. And that is fun. That's a big dopamine rush. Every time you go to a new place, you meet new people, you're connecting with them. It's all good. But are you building the habits that are going to get you there? The big thing I tried to do was, structure my week consistently every week. I did the same thing on Monday every week, same thing Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, and same thing on Friday. So I didn't have to think about it. It's Tuesday. I know what I'm traveling somewhere. And it became easier. And when I found if I didn't travel for a week or two, I'd go to the airport and I was just out of sorts. I did it every week. I felt like George Clooney in Up in the Air, that movie he was in, where he had the whole
Yeah.
system. I could look at a line and I could tell you exactly which one's going to move the fastest. You know, had all a bag to put all my electronics and metal stuff into and stick it in my luggage and fly it through. But if you get out of that routine, all of a sudden you have to consciously think about it instead of subconsciously process it.
Yeah, it's a great point. And most people do like sales because of flexibility, and every day is different, that whole kind of cliche term. And then you have a lot of flexibility too, especially if you're doing well, you can kind of really make your own schedule, which is cool. But that does make it challenging, especially if you're traveling, like you're in hotels or going to different meetings, and you have to go entertain at night, then get up early. It's like that's when stuff can go downhill. So I like what you're saying about the Monday and Friday, and then traveling or doing meetings Tuesday through Thursday. I think that's like an easy one. I feel like is very transferable to a lot of salespeople, and I probably picked up some of that myself. And then, I mean, there is some things you can do. Like I do a lot of prospecting on LinkedIn, so like it doesn't really matter where I'm at as long as I have that trigger that, hey, from 9 to 10:30 a.m. roughly, I'm going to do that every day or 3 days a week. Like I can do that remotely. So at least there's some things like that you can, but it definitely makes it more challenging for sure. So you just have to like, I think planning, right? So if I travel or something, I plan out like if I'm trying to eat healthy or work out or prospect, whatever, you just have to block off the time consistently. So I just have it in my calendar. Like literally I have in my calendar, like prospecting on the days I'm supposed to be prospecting. So it's like, if it's not in my calendar, it's hard for me to trigger it. So I do that for like everything, like eating healthy. I'll write out what I need to eat for the day, like stuff like that.
Yeah. And if you don't write it down, your subconscious is not going to remind you because it doesn't want. Our brain is a pain avoidance machine and a pleasure seeking machine. That's why bad habits are so easy to build. There's a craving, some action, and then the immediate reward. And good habits are really hard to establish because the reward is so far away. It takes motivation or discipline to start, and you have to take some kind of action. And that's why, prospecting, do something, do it for 1 minute, get through that starting point. Because if you do it through a minute, 2 minutes isn't that much more, even though it's 100% more. And then you do a little bit more. And all of a sudden, by the time you get used to it, you start to get some feedback. You start to get some results. And what's a sales process but nothing but a habit? It's a sequence, it's a process. And that's been the number one thing among all the best reps, is that they have a process. And it took years to develop. And they kind of flow through it in a habitual manner. Because if you don't do it, you're going to fall into the trap. You're going to hear the pricing objection. And are you going to take it for what it is, which is just a smokescreen for I have nothing else to say? Or are you going to pounce on it and try and answer it or handle it when it really isn't an objection? It's just I have nothing else to say.
Yeah, no, you're 100% correct. Like everyone that I know that's really does really well in sales has some type of process or system, and that's how they can achieve their goals, and that's how they keep track of their habits. So yeah, I really agree with that. I also think you got to start small too, like you
Real
mentioned.
small.
Don't like I'm doing LinkedIn for like an hour and a half, 2 hours a day most of the time. But that if you try to start off like that and you're not used to doing that, you're going to get destroyed, and it's just not going to work. Or I hate the dialing thing and like calling people, but starting off trying to call 50 people, I mean, you're gonna lose your mind after a couple of days. So like at least do like 10 strategically if you're gonna do something like that. So yeah, you got to start small, do it for 10 minutes, and then by the end of the month maybe you're at 20 25 minutes, and then you can keep kind of building it and be productive. So you got to start small too. But yeah, 100%, you have to have a system behind it, write things down, whatever way that may be, if you want to really get to the next level.
Yeah, I think the writing it down, because everyone thinks, oh, I'll remember it.
Yeah.
Yeah, you'll remember today, maybe yesterday, but that's about it. One of the smartest things I did is I have a wall calendar, and I grade myself every day, and I write down, what workout I did. And here we're recording this in the winter, and the summer I have no problem. The weather's beautiful. You can go outside. But now, the clocks change. You wake up, it's 25 degrees. I'm not going outside. So I have to exercise inside, which is a pattern interrupt. It's still exercise, but now my body's not used to it. So I try and make it as pleasurable as possible. Bought a TV to go next to my rower, bought another TV to go next to the treadmill, have an iPad stand, have AirPods, and tell myself, oh, I'll just do it for 5 minutes. And you get warmed. I'll do 5 more. You trick your brain into it. And this seems childish, but that's how our brains work. What do parents do with kids? They don't say, oh, you're going to go to school for 6 hours. Isn't this going to be delightful? No, they say, oh, you're just going to go into this one room and meet some friends, and the teacher will be, oh, really? That sounds great. Right? In 15 minutes, the kids go, this sucks. I want to go play. You inch yourself into it. And, by the end of the summer, in the fall, I craved going running. Some days more than others. Some days it's a little bit harder. And I always have the same trick. It's like I just get up, I go, get your shoes on, get outside the door. And then I'm outside the door, and all of a sudden the sun's coming up. It's beautiful. So I take some pictures of the sunrise. Okay, just keep walking. Walk as far away from the house. Then, okay, now start running. And I always did the far straight out and then straight back, because it forces you to come back.
Smart. And you do it first thing in the morning? Is that when you
first thing
do your
in the
walk?
morning? Yeah.
First thing in the morning. So you just, okay, I like that. I think that's something too, is like if you start your day off doing something like that, it just puts everything in a good trajectory with like habits and other things. So I'm a big fan of like doing something like challenging right at the beginning of the day. It doesn't have to be running. It could be the morning routine I do. It could be stretching. It could be reading,
Yes.
Whatever it is, just do something right away so that you're not going straight into the grind. And that kind of just sets the tone for like, once you start doing healthy things or whatever, or things that are helping you with business, it's just going to lead you down that path of doing more of that type of stuff versus the opposite. So
Yeah.
if you're scrambling first thing in the morning, like overslept, like it's just going to go downhill from there. Probably.
It does.
Yeah.
And I think you have the right idea with like a morning routine where you're not calling it exercise. It's just a morning routine. Some days it's Orange Theory, or some days it's doing the stairs, or some days it's just doing some floor work and stretching. But by doing something every morning, it becomes a habit. It's harder not to do it than to do it.
Yep. And some of those things are hard to do, right? Like to go run first thing in the morning. That's not like an easy thing to do. And I think there's something about doing those hard things that create those habits that make other things easier too. So it's like when you're doing stuff like that, it just makes some of these other stuff during the day, like prospecting, seem a little bit easier, at least to me. It's like if I'm already like accomplished and doing some challenging things, it's like, oh, come on, hour of LinkedIn, whatever, that's not that bad. So that's how I think about it, at least. So
Well, that's it. And you know, what really got me on this early in my career was I was at this company that was on the quarterly roller coaster. And this is basically how it went. First 2 weeks of the quarter, nothing happened. You couldn't find anybody. Vacations were everyone disappeared for 2 weeks. And then third week, they start scheduling QBRs and strategy meetings. And that happened at the end of the first month. Second month, people would start doing stuff. Third month of the quarter, everyone panicked because the pipeline went from 3x to 1.5x. And that was optimistic. And then all of a sudden, everyone's traveling to your territory to try and pull in deals from next quarter into this quarter. And that was 100% our need, not the customers.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, I can't live like this. So I just adjusted it. I made the last month of the quarter the second month of the quarter. I sandbagged all my deals so that they wouldn't try and pull them in to this quarter. They go try and pull someone else's deals in, screw them up. And when everyone else was away, I'd be working. And I tried to level off my quarter instead of this roller coaster because it didn't really work in my territory. Everyone would be upset and for no reason. And I see it with everybody now. It's either urgent or it doesn't matter. There's nothing in between.
Yeah, that's a great point. It's like being consistent. And I think some of the stuff you mentioned there, like maybe some bad habits that companies have and sales teams about, like the QBRs, like all these meetings, like how much of that is like, it's probably habits, but like, is it really necessary? Is it really like helping drive revenue, and it's distracting people from stuff, and then, asking for business the last like week of the year to close out? I mean, yeah, that's all stuff that's probably not good habits, or it stems from like stuff that doesn't really provide a lot of value, I guess, as far as closing deals.
That's it. And I think a lot of people just react to what they're told to do instead of driving their day, their week, their month, their quarter. It's the number one response I get on my videos and stuff. Tell my manager that. And it's like, why do you listen to your manager? I mean, especially today, where they're not next to you anymore. They tell you to do this, tell you to do that. And the number one thing I hear from managers is, how do I know my reps are working if they're not in the office? How do you know they are working when they're in the office? How do you know they're just not acting like they're working, like a QBR? QBR is nothing but theater.
Mm-hmm.
Because if it was serious, they wouldn't do it. They'd sit down and talk to you. It's really, let's justify our jobs. Let's build up the pipeline. Let's pretend instead of let's dig in and help.
Yeah, that's a great point. And that is true. It's like there's so many people working, or I mean, sales, I feel like even before the pandemic, so many people were remote and you don't have someone watching you all the time. But if you don't have these habits, if you don't have that discipline, I mean, it's easy to